They said the job was simple: change the bandages, administer the meds, and never look him in the eye. They said the pay could clear a lifetime of debt in a month. But they didn't tell me why the last 3 nurses vanished without a trace. They didn't tell me that my patient wasn't just a man. He was Nikolai Volkov, the ghost of the Seattle underworld. A man who viewed mercy as a weakness and affection as a death sentence. I walked into the lion's den to save my father. But to survive the night, I had to do the one thing explicitly forbidden in my contract. I had to break the rules. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Clara Mitchell stood under the awning of a crumbling bodega in Pioneer Square, staring at the screen of her cracked iPhone. The bank notification was bright red: insufficient funds. Behind that notification was a text message from a number listed only as unknown. You have 48 hours, Clara, or we take the old man's other leg. Her father, Jerry, was currently sitting in a wheelchair in their studio apartment, nursing a broken tibia from the last time he'd missed a payment to the local loan sharks. He wasn't a bad man, just a man with an addiction to the flashing lights of the slots that was bigger than his love for self-preservation. Clara tightened her grip on her umbrella. She was 26, a registered nurse with trauma certification from Harborview Medical Center, and she was drowning. Harborview was a prestigious place to work, but the pay didn't cover the vigorous interest rates the sharks were charging. She needed a miracle, or a crime. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't the sharks. It was a private number. Miss Mitchell? The voice was deep, smooth, and utterly devoid of warmth. Speaking? This is Silas Vane. You applied for the private care position listed on the dark web forum. You have an interview in 1 hour. A car is waiting at the corner of 2nd and Yesler. Do not be late. That went dead. Clara's stomach twisted. She hadn't applied on a dark web forum. She had whispered her desperation to a shady orderly at the hospital who claimed to know people who paid cash for discreet medical work. Apparently word traveled fast in the underworld. She shouldn't go. Every instinct screamed that this was how people ended up on the side of a milk carton. But then she thought of her dad, grimacing in pain because they couldn't afford the good painkillers. She walked to the corner. The car was a matte black Mercedes G-Wagon, idling silently. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. The back door clicked open. Clara got in. The driver didn't speak. The interior smelled of expensive leather and gun oil. They drove for 2 hours, leaving the city limits, heading deep into the Cascade foothills where the trees grew thick and the cell service died. They arrived at a gate that looked more like the entrance to a military black site than a home. 12-foot iron fences topped with razor wire. Cameras with red blinking eyes swiveled to track the car. The gate groaned open, revealing a sprawling, brutalist concrete mansion cantilevered over a rushing river. Inside, Clara was escorted into a study that was colder than the rain outside. Silas Vane stood by the fireplace. He was a man made of sharp angles, wearing a suit that cost more than Clara's medical school tuition. He didn't offer a hand. He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. Non-disclosure agreement, Silas said. You sign, you work, you talk, you die. It is legally binding. But we prefer older methods of enforcement. Clara picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. Who is the patient? Mr. Volkov, Silas said, watching her eyes for a reaction. Clara froze. Everyone in Seattle knew the name Volkov, not from the news was too scared to print it, but from the whispers. Nikolai Volkov, the head of the Volkov Bratva. They said he controlled the ports. They said he had fed a rival to the pigs in Snohomish. He was shot 3 weeks ago, Silas continued, indifferent to her fear. The bullet was removed, but the wound is complicated. Infection risk is high. His temperament is poor. The last nurse left after 2 days. Left? Clara asked. She was escorted out, in tears. She failed to follow the rules. What are the rules? Silas held up 3 fingers. 1. You administer medication and change dressings at 0800 and 2000 hours. No exceptions. 2. You do not speak to him unless it is a medical necessity. He is not your friend. He is not your patient. He is your employer. 3. Under no circumstances do you touch him without his explicit verbal permission, unless he is unconscious. Clara looked at the contract. The salary figure was staggering. $20,000 a week. Cash, 2 weeks. She just needed to last 2 weeks, and she could pay off her dad's debt entirely. I can handle difficult patients, Clara said, signing her name. Silas smirked, a cruel twisting of lips. Mr. Volkov isn't difficult, Miss Mitchell. He's rabid. The west wing of the estate was sealed off by a heavy oak door that required a biometric scan. Silas swiped his thumb, and the lock disengaged with a heavy thud. You are on your own from here, Silas said. The kitchen is stocked. Your room is the first on the left. His suite is at the end of the hall. He missed his morning dose of antibiotics. Fix it. Silas turned and left, the heavy door locking behind him. Clara was trapped. The hallway was dim, lit only by recessed floor lights. The air smelled of antiseptic and something metallic. Blood. It was quiet, the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Clara went to her room first to drop her bag. It was luxurious but sterile, like a high-end hotel room. She changed into her scrubs, navy blue, practical. She clipped her hair back, checked her pockets for her pen light and stethoscope, and grabbed the medical tray Silas had left on the hall table. It contained a bag of vancomycin, a fresh IV kit, and wound dressing supplies. She walked to the end of the hall. The double doors to the master suite were ajar. Mr. Volkov, she called out softly. I'm Clara. I'm your new nurse. No answer. Just the sound of rain hammering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. She pushed the door open. The room was a wreck. A chair was overturned. A vase of flowers lay shattered on the floor, the water soaking into an expensive Persian rug. In the center of the room was a massive king-sized bed, the sheets tangled. But the bed was empty. Clara scanned the room. Mr. Volkov. Movement in the corner. Shadow separating from shadow. He was sitting in a high-backed leather armchair facing the window, hidden in the gloom. All she could see was the silhouette of broad shoulders and the glow of a cigarette. Medical necessity, a voice rasped. It sounded like gravel grinding together. Get out. Clara stepped forward, her nursing instincts overriding her fear. Smoking is strictly forbidden with the antibiotics you're supposed to be taking. It constricts blood vessels and inhibits healing. The chair spun around violently. Clara gasped. Nikolai Volkov was terrifying. He was shirtless, his torso wrapped in bloody bandages that looked days old. He was huge, easily 6'4", with muscles that coiled tight under pale, scarred skin. But it was his face that held her. High cheekbones, a jaw cut from granite, and eyes that were the color of glacial ice. Cold, blue, and burning with fever. Dark stubble covered his jaw, and sweat slicked his forehead. He looked like a fallen angel who had crawled out of hell and was pissed about it. I didn't ask for a lecture, Nikolai growled, standing up. He swayed slightly. He was septic. She could tell just by looking at him. I asked for solitude. You have a fever, Clara said, her voice steady, despite her heart hammering against her ribs. She set the tray down on a side table. And you're bleeding through your dressing. If I don't clean that, you'll lose the tissue, maybe the whole arm. Let it rot, he spat. He took a drag of the cigarette, daring her to stop him. Clara looked at the shattered vase on the floor. This man was in pain, and he was lashing out because it was the only control he had left. He was used to being the predator, and injury had made him feel like prey. I'm not going to let it rot, Clara said, moving closer. Sit down. Nikolai laughed, a dark, humorless sound. He took a step toward her, looming over her, using his size to intimidate. He smelled of tobacco, sweat, and raw masculinity. "Do you know who I am, little nurse?" "I know you're a patient with a resting heart rate of probably 110 and a temperature of 103, Clara fired back, tilting her chin up to look him in the eye. "And I know you're afraid." The room went deadly silent. Nikolai's eyes narrowed. "Afraid?" "Afraid of being weak," Clara clarified. "Now sit down, or I will sedate you, and I'm very good with a needle." For a second, she thought he was going to hit her. His hand twitched. The tension was a physical weight in the room. Then the adrenaline seemed to drain out of him. He stumbled, gripping the back of the chair. The fever was winning. "You have 5 minutes," he gritted out, sinking back into the leather chair. "If you hurt me, I break your fingers." "Deal," Clara whispered. She worked quickly. She knelt beside him, cutting away the soiled bandages. The wound was a jagged tear along his oblique and lower ribs, a graze from a high-caliber round that had taken a chunk of flesh. It was angry, red, and weeping pus. "This needs stitches redone," she murmured, focused on the task. "And a drain." "Just bandage it," he ordered through gritted teeth. Clara ignored him. She cleaned the wound with saline. He flinched, his muscles turning to rock under her hands. "Breathe," she instructed softly. Without thinking, she placed her free hand on his knee to steady him. Rule number 3, do not touch him. Nikolai's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in a vice grip. His skin was burning hot. "I said," he whispered, his face inches from hers, "bandage it." Clara didn't pull away. She looked at his hand on her wrist, then up into his eyes. "I can't do my job if you're fighting me, Nikolai." Using his first name was a gamble. It was an intimacy he hadn't granted. His eyes widened slightly, surprised by her audacity. He stared at her, really looking at her for the first time. He saw the dark circles under her eyes, the fraying collar of her scrubs, the stubborn set of her jaw. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't shaking. Slowly, he released her wrist. "Do it properly," he muttered, looking away out the window. "But if you linger, you're fired." Clara exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. She prepped the needle. She stitched him up, her movements precise and gentle. She set up the IV line for the antibiotics. When she was done, she checked his temperature, 102.8. "I need to check on you in 4 hours, she said, gathering the bloody waste. "Don't come back until morning," he rasped, closing his eyes. "I'll come back when the protocol dictates," Clara said firmly. She walked to the door. "Nurse," he called out just as she reached the threshold. She turned. "Leave the whiskey." He pointed to a decanter on the shelf. "It interferes with the meds," she said. "Leave it." Clara hesitated. Then she walked over, grabbed the crystal decanter of whiskey, and walked out the door with it. "Hey!" he roared, trying to rise. "Hydrate with water, Mr. Volkov," she shouted back, slamming the heavy oak door and locking it from the outside. She leaned against the corridor wall, her legs finally giving way to the trembling. She slid down to the floor, hugging the bottle of expensive whiskey to her chest. She had survived the first hour, and she had just stolen liquor from a mafia don. Inside the room, Nikolai Volkov stared at the closed door. The pain in his side was a dull throb now, better than the sharp agony of before. He looked at his bandaged side. It was neat. Professional. He chuckled, a dry, rusty sound. "She stole my scotch," he whispered to the empty room. For the first time in 3 weeks, he didn't feel the urge to put a bullet in someone. He felt something else. Curiosity. But curiosity was dangerous. For her, because Nikolai knew something Clara didn't. The bullet that hit him wasn't from an enemy. It was from a traitor inside this very house. And by walking through that door, Clara Mitchell had just placed herself directly in the crosshairs. The next morning, the sky was the color of a bruised plum. The storm hadn't broken. It had just settled into a sullen, heavy drizzle. Clara hadn't slept. She had spent the night in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the high-tech security system and the pounding of her own heart. At 0600, her phone had buzzed. Mick, 36 hours. Hope your dad likes walking, because he won't be doing much of it after tomorrow. She had deleted the message, washed her face with cold water, and put her armor back on. The navy scrubs, the tight ponytail, the professional mask. At 0755, she stood outside the oak doors. "Enter!" Nikolai's voice came through the intercom. It was stronger than yesterday, but still edged with pain. Clara swiped her keycard. The room was cleaner than she had left it. Someone, likely the silent staff that moved through the house like ghosts, had cleaned the rug and removed the shattered vase. Nikolai was in the bed, propped up against a mountain of pillows. He was wearing a black t-shirt that clung to his chest, his bandaged arm resting on a pillow. He was working. A laptop was open on his knees, and he was typing with his good hand, his eyes scanning a stream of data that looked like shipping manifests. "You're late," he said without looking up. "It's 0800 exactly," Clara countered, setting the tray down. "Breakfast, oatmeal, fruit, black coffee, and your meds." Nikolai closed the laptop. He looked at the oatmeal with profound disdain. "I don't eat slop." "You need soft foods. Your body is fighting an infection. Digestion takes energy you don't have." Clara picked up the bowl. "Eat." "No." "Mr. Volkov." "Nikolai," he corrected, his eyes finally locking onto hers. They were clearer today, the fever having broken slightly, which only made his gaze more piercing. "If you are going to nag me like a wife, use my name." Clara felt a flush rise up her neck, but she ignored it. "Nikolai, eat the damn oatmeal." He smirked. It changed his face completely, transforming him from a monster into something dangerously charming. "You are very brave for someone so small. Silas tells me you have debts." Clara froze. The spoon hovered halfway to the bowl. Silas ran a background check, Nikolai said casually, reopening his laptop. "Clara Mitchell, graduated top of her class, fired from St. Mary's for insubordination. You argued with a senior surgeon who made a mistake. Father, Jeremiah Mitchell, gambler, debtor, currently owing 50 grand to the O'Malley syndicate." Clara set the bowl down slowly. Her hands were shaking. "Is that why you hired me? Because you knew I couldn't say no?" "I hired you because you were the only one desperate enough to come here who wasn't an assassin," Nikolai said. "But know this, Clara. The O'Malleys are bottom feeders. If you do your job, I will handle them." "I don't need you to handle my problems," Clara snapped, her pride stinging. "I need to do my job so I can get paid and handle them myself." "Stubborn," Nikolai murmured. He reached for the coffee, ignoring the food. "I like stubborn. It means you won't break when things get loud." "Loud? My enemies know I'm hurt. They are circling. That gate outside isn't just for show. So focus on your nursing. If bullets start flying, stay low." Clara stared at him. This was madness. She was arguing about oatmeal with a man who discussed impending gang warfare as if it were the weather forecast. "If you want to survive a gunfight," Clara said, pushing the bowl back toward him, "you need your strength. Eat." Nikolai stared at her for a long 5 seconds. The air crackled. It was a contest of wills, pure and simple. He was testing her boundaries, seeing if she would cower. She didn't. Finally, Nikolai let out a huff of annoyance, grabbed the spoon, and took a bite. "It tastes like wet cardboard. It's full of fiber. Good for you." He ate half the bowl, watching her the entire time. When he was done, he held out his arm for the fresh IV. "You have a light touch," he commented as she slid the needle in. "I had a lot of practice on geriatric veins. They roll." "My veins don't roll," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "They fight." Clara taped the line down. She was close to him now, smelling the soap he used. Sandalwood and steel. He wasn't feverish anymore. He was just hot. "I need to check the wound," she said, pulling back. She lifted his shirt. The redness had gone down, but the bruising was spectacular, a canvas of purple and black spreading across his ribs. As she palpated the area gently, Nikolai hissed. "Sorry," she whispered. "Don't apologize," he gritted out. "Pain is information." That's a very bleak worldview. It's a survivor's worldview. He looked down at the top of her head. "Why didn't you run? When you saw it was me." Clara finished the dressing and stood up. "Because my dad doesn't have a survivor's worldview. He just has bad luck, and I'm the only one who can save him." Nikolai studied her. "Loyalty? Rare. Stupidity, mostly," Clara sighed. She gathered her things. "I'll be back at noon." "Clara," he said. She paused at the door. "The whiskey," he said. "Bring it back." "No, I'm the boss, and I'm the nurse, and until that infection is gone, I outrank you." She walked out. As the door clicked shut, she heard a low, genuine laugh from the other side. It was the most terrifying sound she had heard yet, because it made her like him, and liking Nikolai Volkov was a fatal mistake. By the third day, the routine had settled into a strange, tense rhythm. The medication, the dressing changes, the arguments over food, the lingering glances that lasted a second too long. But outside the sanctuary of the West Wing, the atmosphere in the house was shifting. Silas was tighter, more agitated. Security guards with assault rifles were patrolling the hallways now, not just the perimeter. The house felt like a fortress under siege. It was 2 a.m. on Thursday when Clara woke up. She hadn't been sleeping well. The bed was too soft, the silence too deep. She was thirsty. She slipped out of her room, barefoot, wearing only an oversized t-shirt and pajama shorts. She padded down the hallway towards the kitchen. As she passed the library, a room Silas used as a command center, she heard voices. "It has to be tonight." Clara froze. The voice wasn't Silas. It was higher, readier. She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. "The boss is weak," the voice continued. "The nurse is distracting him. The sensors in the East Garden are looped. You have a 10-minute window." Clara's blood turned to ice. "Traitor." "And the girl?" a second voice asked. "Kill her too. No witnesses. The O'Malleys want the message sent loud and clear." Clara clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. The O'Malleys, the same people holding her father's debt, were orchestrating a hit on Nikolai, and she was collateral damage. She heard footsteps approaching the door. Panic surged. If she ran back to her room, they might see her. She bolted the other way, towards the West Wing. She didn't have her keycard. She had left it on her nightstand. She reached the heavy oak door, locked. "Damn it," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. She looked back. The library door handle was turning. She did the only thing she could think of. She hammered her fist on the wood. "Nikolai! Nikolai!" Behind her, the library door opened. A man stepped out. Arthur, the head of the night security detail. He saw her. His hand went to the gun on his hip. "Miss Mitchell," Arthur said, his voice smooth and deadly. "You should be in bed." I heard a noise," Clara stammered, backing up against the door. "I need to check on the patient." "The patient is fine," Arthur said, walking toward her slowly. "But you look distressed. Why don't you come with me?" He pulled the gun. A silencer was attached. Clara squeezed her eyes shut. "I'm sorry, Dad." Click, beep. The door behind her hissed open. A hand shot out, large, scarred, and incredibly fast. It grabbed Clara by the back of her shirt and yanked her backward into the darkness of the bedroom. Clara stumbled, falling onto the hard floor. Nikolai stood in the doorway, wearing nothing but grey sweatpants. In his hand was a Sig Sauer P226. Arthur froze. "Boss, I was just—" Thwip, thwip. 2 shots, sent a mass. Arthur dropped to the floor without a sound, his eyes wide with shock. Nikolai hit a button on the wall, and the heavy door slammed shut and locked with a series of metallic clanks that sounded like a vault ceiling. He turned to Clara. He wasn't the charming rogue from the morning. He was the devil, His eyes were black, his breathing heavy. The exertion had torn his stitches. Fresh blood was blooming on the white bandage around his ribs. "Up!" he ordered. Clara scrambled to her feet, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. He was going to— "He was the leak," Nikolai said calmly, engaging the safety on his gun. "I suspected him. I just needed him to make a move." He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her trembling form, her bare legs, the terror in her eyes. He stepped closer. "Are you hurt?" "No," she squeaked. "Good." He winced, grabbing his side. He swayed. "Nikolai!" Clara rushed forward, catching him as he buckled. He was heavy, dead weight, but she managed to guide him to the edge of the bed. "You ripped it open," she cried, looking at the blood soaking his waistband. "You idiot! You shot a man and ripped your stitches." "He was going to kill you," Nikolai gritted out, leaning his head back against the headboard. "I don't like people touching my things." Clara paused, her hands hovering over the bandages. "Your things?" "My nurse," he corrected, but the correction lacked conviction. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a raw, electric tension in the room. They were alone. A dead body was in the hallway. The storm was raging outside. "Clara," he whispered. "I need to get the suture kit," she said, her voice trembling. "Wait." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over her bottom lip. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was shockingly gentle. Rule number 3, do not touch him. But he was touching her. "You heard them," he said softly. "You heard them talking about the O'Malleys." "Yes," she whispered. They said the sensors are looped. They said they're coming tonight." Nikolai's eyes hardened. He pulled his hand away, the moment of intimacy shattered by the reality of war. "Then we don't have time for stitches," he said, standing up, ignoring the pain. He moved to a hidden panel in the wall, punching in a code. It slid open to reveal a rack of weapons and monitors. "Silas," he barked into a radio. "Code red. The breach is internal. Arthur is down. Sector 4 is compromised. Wake the boys." He turned back to Clara. He grabbed a Kevlar vest from the rack and threw it at her. "Put this on." "What about you?" "I don't need a vest," he said, racking the slide of a shotgun. "I have rage." "Nikolai, you can't fight," Clara shouted, grabbing his arm. "You're bleeding out." He looked down at her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. He covered her hand with his own. "Clara," he said, his voice low and intense. "Tonight, I am not a patient. Tonight, I am the reason they are afraid of the dark. Now stay close to me. If you see anyone who isn't me or Silas, you scream." The lights in the house suddenly cut out. The room plunged into total darkness. "They're here," Nikolai whispered. He grabbed her hand, interlacing their fingers. "Run!" The hallway was a tunnel of suffocating blackness. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning, tearing through the sky outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the rain that lashed against the glass like shrapnel. Nikolai moved with a silence that shouldn't have been possible for a man of his size, let alone one bleeding through his side. He held the shotgun leveled, guiding Clara with a firm hand on the back of her Kevlar vest. "Stay behind me," he breathed. "If I drop, you take the gun." "I don't know how to shoot," Clara hissed, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Point and pull. It's a shotgun. You don't need to aim. You just need to mean it." They reached the top of the grand staircase. Below, the foyer was a chaotic dance of flashlight beams cutting through the gloom. Voices shouted orders in rough, jagged English. "Clear the ground floor. Find the boss. Find the girl." "They're inside," Clara whispered, terror seizing her throat. "Not for long," Nikolai replied. He didn't retreat. He advanced. He stepped out onto the landing, silhouetted by a flash of lightning, looking like a vengeful god. "Gentlemen," Nikolai roared, his voice thunderous, echoing off the marble walls. "You seem to be lost." 3 beams of light snapped up toward him. Boom! The shotgun roared. The lead mercenary at the bottom of the stairs flew backward, his flashlight spinning across the floor. Chaos erupted. Gunfire erupted from below, bullets chipping the stone balustrade near Clara's head. She screamed, dropping to her knees and covering her head. "Move!" Nikolai grabbed her, hauling her toward the east wing corridor. He fired again, blind, keeping heads down while he dragged her into the shadows. He was slower now. She could hear the wet hitch in his breathing. The physical toll was catching up. "Kitchen!" he gritted out. "Service elevator, to the garage!" They ran. Clara could hear boots pounding on the stairs behind them. They were being hunted. They burst into the industrial kitchen. Stainless steel counters gleamed in the moonlight. Nikolai slammed the door and shoved a heavy prep table in front of it. "It won't hold them," Clara said, scanning the room for a weapon. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet. It felt ridiculous, but it was all she had. "It doesn't have to," Nikolai gasped. He leaned heavily against the refrigerator, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor. The blood on his side was no longer a stain. It was a steady flow. "Nikolai!" Clara dropped the skillet and fell to her knees beside him. She pressed her hands over the wound, applying pressure. "You're losing too much blood. We need to stop moving. If we stop, we die," he murmured, his eyes fluttering shut. "The code for the elevator. 1984. Nikolai, stay with me." The kitchen door shuddered as someone rammed it from the other side. Then a gunshot blew the lock out. The door swung open. 2 men entered. Tactical gear, night vision goggles. They saw Nikolai on the floor. "Target acquired," the first one said, raising his rifle. Clara didn't think. She didn't calculate. She reacted. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet she had dropped, screamed a sound of pure, primal rage, and launched herself at the man. It was insane. It was suicidal. But the mercenary was expecting a cowering civilian, not a banshee with cookware. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Clang. Clara swung the skillet with every ounce of desperation in her body, connecting with the side of his helmet. It didn't knock him out, but it staggered him. He stumbled back, his rifle firing wild into the ceiling. The second man turned his weapon toward Clara. Bang! Bang! 2 clean shots rang out from the floor. The second man dropped, a hole in his forehead. Nikolai was still sitting against the fridge, the smoking pistol in his hand, steady as a rock, despite his grey complexion. He shifted his aim to the first man, who was shaking his head, trying to recover from Clara's blow. Bang! 3 bodies in the kitchen. Silence returned, heavy and ringing. Clara stood there, chest heaving, gripping the skillet so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at the dead men. She looked at Nikolai. "You!" Nikolai wheezed, a bloody grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Are a lunatic." "I'm a nurse," she sobbed, the adrenaline crashing. "I'm supposed to save lives." "You just saved mine," he said. Suddenly the lights flickered and buzzed back on. The kitchen was flooded with harsh fluorescent light. The service elevator dinged. Clara spun around, raising the skillet again. The doors opened, revealing Silas and 4 men who looked like they were carved from granite. They were heavily armed. "Boss," Silas rushed forward, his face pale. "We cleared the perimeter. The rest of them scattered when the lights came back on." Silas looked at the carnage in the kitchen. He looked at the dead mercenary with the dented helmet, then at Clara holding the frying pan. "Did you—" Silas started. "Don't ask," Nikolai groaned, trying to stand and failing. His gun clattered to the floor. His eyes rolled back in his head. "Nikolai!" Clara dropped the pan and caught him before he hit the tiles. "Get him to the infirmary, now. He's in hypovolemic shock." The infirmary in the basement was better equipped than most rural hospitals. It had a sterile field, a ventilator, and a fully stocked pharmacy. For the next hour, Clara wasn't a hostage, and she wasn't a debtor's daughter. She was the charge nurse. "Silas, cut his shirt. You get me 2 units of O-negative from the fridge. Move!" The men, terrifying killers who could snap necks with one hand, scrambled to obey her commands. Clara worked with terrifying precision. She intubated Nikolai to help him breathe. She set up a rapid infuser for the blood. She cleaned the wound, which was a mess of torn muscle and infection. "He needs surgery," she announced, her gloves slick with blood. "The bullet from weeks ago fragmented. There's a piece pressing on an artery. Every time he moves, it cuts him." "Can you do it?" Silas asked from the other side of the operating table. "I'm a trauma nurse, not a surgeon," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. "But if we wait for a surgeon to get out here, he'll be dead." "Then do it," Silas said. "We trust you." Clara took a deep breath. She picked up the scalpel. For 40 minutes, the only sound in the room was the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor and the snip of scissors. Clara dug into the flesh of the most dangerous man in Seattle. She found the fragment, a jagged shard of lead the size of a fingernail, and pulled it out. "Got it," she exhaled, dropping it into a metal tray with a clink. She stitched the artery. She closed the muscle. She stapled the skin. "BP is stabilizing," she noted, watching the monitor. "He's going to make it." She peeled off her gloves and slumped against the counter, her legs finally giving out. Silas caught her by the elbow, steadying her. "You did good," Silas said. It was the first time he had spoken to her with genuine respect. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked, looking at Nikolai's pale, unconscious form. "He's a Volkov. He's too stubborn to die," Silas said. He pulled a chair over. "Sit. Drink water." Clara sat, sipping the water, watching the rise and fall of Nikolai's chest. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only a hollow ache. "Silas," she said quietly. "Who were they?" Silas leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. His face was grim. "Mercenaries hired by the O'Malley syndicate, but they had inside help. Arthur let them in." "Why now?" Clara asked. "Why tonight?" Silas hesitated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. It had a cracked screen. "This was Arthur's phone," Silas said. "We unlocked it." He tapped the screen and handed it to Clara. There was a text chain. "Unknown. The girl is inside. Arthur. Confirmed. She's the nurse. Unknown. Good." Her father squealed, told us exactly where she went. "Use her to get close to Volkov, then kill them both. The debt is cancelled if she opens the door." Clara stared at the screen. The words blurred. Her father squealed. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible. My dad, he wouldn't." "Gamblers get desperate, Clara," Silas said gently, taking the phone back. "The O'Malleys probably threatened to kill him if he didn't tell them where you were. He traded your location for his life." Clara felt like she had been punched in the gut. She had walked into the lion's den to save her father. She had fought off killers, stitched up a mob boss, and almost died. All to pay off a debt for a man who had sold her out. She stood up, nausea rolling over her. "I need air." "Clara, you can't go outside. I just need to be away from here," she cried, tears finally spilling over. She ran out of the infirmary, up the stairs, and into the main living room. The storm had passed. The moon was out, shining through the bullet holes in the windows. She curled up on one of the pristine white sofas and wept. She cried for her father's betrayal, for the blood on her hands, for the terrifying realization that she was safer with a ruthless mafia boss than she was with her own family. She didn't hear him approach. She only realized he was there when a heavy blanket was draped over her shoulders. She looked up. Nikolai was standing there. He was swaying slightly, leaning on an IV pole he had dragged up the stairs. He was pale as a sheet, wearing fresh sweatpants and no shirt, the fresh bandages stark white against his skin. "You should be in bed," Clara hiccuped, wiping her eyes. "So should you," he rasped. He sat down next to her on the sofa. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, his presence a solid, warm anchor. "Silas told me," Nikolai said eventually. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "It's my fault. They came because of me." "They came because they want my territory," Nikolai corrected firmly. "Your father was just a tool they used. Do not take credit for the malice of evil men." He sold me out, Nikolai. My own dad. Nikolai turned his head to look at her. His blue eyes were dark, unfathomable. Family is a bloodline, Clara. Loyalty is a choice. Your father made his choice. He reached out, taking her hand. His grip was weak, but possessive. You saved my life twice tonight, he said. According to the laws of my people, I now owe you a life debt. I don't want a debt, Clara said. I just want to go home, but I don't have a home anymore. No, Nikolai said. You don't. He squeezed her hand. The O'Malleys know who you are now. If you leave this house, you're dead. If you go back to your father, you're dead. Clara looked at him, fear returning. So I'm a prisoner? No, Nikolai said. He lifted her hand, bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. You are under my protection, and tomorrow we are going to pay a visit to Mr. O'Malley. And your father. You can't walk, Clara argued weakly, though her heart was racing at the sensation of his lips on her skin. I don't need to walk, Nikolai said, a cold, ruthless smile spreading across his face. I have an army, and I have a very angry nurse. 48 hours later, the painkillers were wearing off, and Nikolai Volkov was in a foul mood. He stood before the full-length mirror in his dressing room. The custom-tailored Italian suit hid the bulk of the bandages around his ribs, but it couldn't hide the stiffness in his movement or the dangerous pallor of his skin. Clara stood behind him, her arms crossed, wearing a black dress Silas had procured for her. It was simple, elegant, and far removed from the scrubs she had arrived in. You're popping stitches, she said flatly. I can see you wincing in the reflection. Pain is entirely psychological, Nikolai lied, adjusting his cuffs. He turned to face her. The intensity of his gaze hadn't diminished, but the icy distance was gone. It had been replaced by a possessive heat that made Clara's breath catch. Are you ready? To watch you commit murder? Not particularly. To watch justice being served, he corrected. He walked over to her, invading her space, until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. He opened it. Inside was a platinum ring with a solitaire diamond so large it looked heavy. Clara stared at it. What is that? A lie, Nikolai said. He pulled it from the box and took her left hand. O'Malley respects only two things, violence and ownership. If you walk in there as my nurse, he sees a weakness. If you walk in there as my fiancé, he sees an alliance. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It felt cold and heavy, a shackle and a shield all at once. It's just for show, she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. Nikolai didn't answer. He just ran his thumb over the diamond, then offered her his arm. Shall we, my dear? The motorcade consisted of 4 black SUVs. They didn't head toward the glittering city center. They headed down to the industrial docks, where the air smelled of diesel fumes, rotting wood, and secrets. They pulled up to a corrugated metal warehouse, surrounded by rusted shipping containers. Silas and 6 of his men got out first, securing the perimeter with assault rifles held loosely at their sides. Silas opened the door for Nikolai and Clara. They're inside, Silas confirmed. O'Malley brought 4 guys. Your father is unarmed. Nikolai nodded. He took Clara's hand, her ring hand, and led her towards the warehouse entrance. Inside, the space was cavernous and dimly lit by flickering sodium lights. In the center of the concrete floor stood Declan O'Malley, a squat man in a cheap suit with a face like crumpled dough. Behind him, cowering near a stack of wooden pallets, sat Jerry Mitchell on a folding chair. He looked smaller than Clara remembered, pathetic and trembling. When they entered, O'Malley puffed out his chest. Volkov, heard you were dead. Was about to pop a bottle to celebrate. Premature ejaculation seems to be a recurring problem for you, Declan, Nikolai said smoothly, his voice echoing in the vast space. He didn't stop walking until he was 10 feet away. He kept Clara tucked tightly to his side. O'Malley's eyes darted to Clara, then to the massive rock on her finger. His smirk faltered. "What's with the broad? I thought you were here to pay her old man's debt." "The debt is cancelled," Nikolai said. "That's not how business works, Volkov. It is when the creditor tries to assassinate me in my own home." Nikolai's voice dropped to that terrifying, gravelly whisper. "You broke the peace, Declan. You hired amateurs, and you used a rat to do it." Nikolai gestured with his free hand. Silas stepped forward, dragging Jerry Mitchell by the collar of his tattered jacket and throwing him onto the concrete at Clara's feet. Jerry looked up, his eyes watery with booze and fear. "Clara, baby girl, you gotta help me. Tell him I love you." Clara looked down at the man who had raised her. The man who had taught her to ride a bike. The man who had traded her life for 50 grand to cover a blackjack deficit. She felt a profound, aching sadness, but beneath it, something harder was forming, like steel tempering in fire. "You love the tables more, Dad," Clara said, her voice devoid of emotion. "No, Clara, listen. They threatened me. They said they'd break my legs," Jerry sobbed, crawling toward her feet. "So you let them try to put a bullet in my head instead?" Clara stepped back, revulsion coiling in her stomach. "I went into that house to save you. I almost died for you, and you sold me out." She looked up at Nikolai. "I'm done with him." Nikolai nodded slowly. He looked at O'Malley. "You wanted $50,000 for the Mitchell debt. Here is my counteroffer." Nikolai raised his right hand. He held a gold-plated lighter. He flicked it open. Silas and his men raised their rifles simultaneously. The metallic clack, clack, clack of safeties, disengaging, filled the warehouse. O'Malley's men reached for their waistbands, but they were too slow. They were outgunned 3-1. "Wait, Volkov, wait. We can talk business," O'Malley stammered, putting his hands up. "We just did," Nikolai said. He dropped the lit lighter onto a trail of liquid on the floor that Clara hadn't noticed before. Accelerant. A wall of fire whooshed up between Nikolai's crew and O'Malley's. "Let's go," Nikolai said, turning his back on the flames and the shouting men. They walked out of the warehouse as the fire alarm began to shriek. Silas and the men stayed behind to ensure the negotiation concluded permanently. Outside, the sea air felt cleaner, even mixed with the smoke. Nikolai leaned heavily against the SUV, his face grey with pain. The adrenaline was gone. "You okay?" Clara asked, instinctively reaching for his wrist to check his pulse. He caught her hand. "I'm fine. The debt is gone, Clara. You are free." Clara looked back at the burning warehouse, then down at the ring on her finger. She thought about her tiny apartment, the overdue bills, the constant fear. Then she looked at Nikolai Volkov, the monster of Seattle, the man who had shielded her body with his own when the bullets started flying. "No," Clara whispered, stepping closer to him, threading her fingers through his. "I'm not free, and this ring isn't a lie." Nikolai stared at her, his blue eyes searching hers for any sign of hesitation. He found none. "You break all the rules, little nurse," he murmured. "Only the ones that don't matter." He pulled her in, his arm going around her waist, ignoring the protest of his own torn flesh. He kissed her, hard and deep, right there on the docks under the watchful gaze of his army. It tasted of smoke, danger, and a future that was terrifyingly bright. She had walked into the lion's den a victim. She was walking out a queen, and God help anyone who tried to touch what was hers. And that is the story of how Clara Mitchell went from drowning in debt to ruling the Seattle underworld beside the man everyone feared. It's a twisted tale that proves loyalty isn't about bloodlines, it's about who is willing to bleed for you. And sometimes the safest place to be is in the arms of the most dangerous man in the room. If you enjoyed this dark, twisty mafia romance, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Leave a comment down below. Do you think Clara made the right choice in the end? And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story. Thanks for watching.